You need pipe hitters that can flip the switch to violence in a heartbeat. Pipe hitters tend to be males, not females. And that's what you need around your president. Do your capabilities match your courage, right? Because if you don't have the courage that matches, if both of those things aren't equal, then you'll find yourself in a world of hesitation and get yourself killed or get other people killed, right? So capability and courage got to be combined. And if you're one of those men, then you should be doing that. That's the takeaway.
Clint, welcome back to the Order of Man podcast. So good to see you, man.
Hey, you too. It's been a minute. I think this is number 3 for me and you, maybe. I don't know.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I joined your podcast not too long, maybe roughly a year or so, a little over a year or so ago. So we've had some good conversations. I never, in my wildest dreams, would have imagined that we'd be having a certain kind of conversation today that I was not prepared to have when we set this up last week.
Yeah, who would have thought? I mean, just a little bit of time can make a huge difference, right? Nuts.
Time and literally inches, right? Inches could spell the difference between what we're dealing with now in society and something that could be completely different. I'm really glad on the timing of you and I talking, because if I understand correctly, you helped run some security for President Trump's inauguration in 2017. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. My company, Escape the Wolf, got contacted by some of my Secret Service folks, and Trump wanted to extend Secret Service to a bunch of his family and friends, which, as we all know, that's not their mission. And so the Secret Service said, hey, there's several people that need some, more discreet protection for the entire weekend. And so we ended up providing, obviously drivers and then close in personal security for these folks. And so I had the awesome and rare opportunity to go to an inauguration. I think every American should go to one at least once in their life. It is pretty cool to see the transition of power in person. And then all the events, the ball and everything else that comes with it is pretty damn cool. But security is pretty much what I do on the physical side, and then also within policies and all the other boring stuff. But I'll stop there and we can dig in.
Yeah, it's interesting as you see a lot of the commentary from people who are both intelligent and a lot of people who are just ignorant. I would put myself in the latter category. I'm ignorant about a lot of this stuff. I do have some very, very minimal experience with the military and working in the government. But there's a lot of people just completely throwing Secret Service under the bus over the past weekend. And I think there's a lot of things to be critical of. But also, I think what a lot of people are missing is the bureaucracy and the red tape that goes along with, rules of engagement, for example. One rule of engagement I saw, for example, and whether this is true or not, I can definitely see this being the case, is that the Secret Service was not permitted or authorized to take a shot until that was authorized by somebody else who may or may not have even been there or in the situation itself. And so there's obviously going to be a delay and a lag of time between the time the shooter was identified and the time that that threat was neutralized. What do you think about that?
That's a lot. So looking at layers of security, right? When you talk just generally about an open air venue like that, the Secret Service rolls in. They are responsible for the advon, right? Or that advance piece. And it is their job to then look at the venue and say, and through a reporting system, hey, these are all the things that need to happen in order to make this as secure as possible. And keep in mind, it is literally almost impossible to 100% secure an open air venue like that. It just is, right? But obviously, somebody did not do their homework upon the assessment. And if they did put it in the report that, hey, all rooftops need to have at least one armed person on top, or, hey, we need to channelize the crowds into here, here, and here, or we need to block off a much greater fence line or perimeter with barricades, right? All of this would be put into a report. And then the next part of the security layer is local law enforcement, contracted security, the type of people you see that wear windbreakers that say security on the back and they're paid $7 an hour. So there's layers to the security that then get implemented based on the Secret Service assessment. So if the assessment said something that didn't happen, then that's, unfortunately, it still probably rides on Secret Service, because if you're going to do the assessment, then it should be on the assessors to then make sure that local law enforcement, contracted security, and whoever else are actually doing what's required. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can't if it's the old adage, the buck stops here, right? You can't, if you're up here on this higher echelon, then say, well, the people we hired didn't do a good job. Well, you hired them. I mean, that was your responsibility. So two things can exist. Local law enforcement may not have done the job necessary, but also you're responsible for ensuring that the former president is protected.
Right. And when you dig in more granular, right, we know that they do assessments, right? They do the advance. They have a report. The report lays out requirements. The question will be, who didn't follow through on the requirements, or was all that information missed in the assessment, right? That would be really bad if they did an advance and they didn't cover down on those rooftops that were literally a couple of 100 yards away or less, right? I mean, that just seems common sense. But now when you dive into the actual enclosed personal security of Trump, those guys followed their protocols, right? It is all about stacking plates, right? No different than us in a combat situation. If one of my buddies gets injured, gets shot, and we still have incoming fire, I'm putting my body armor on my buddy. We're all going to dogpile and put body armor everywhere to prevent any further injury or death or whatever. So what they did was exactly what they're supposed to do. Is, Trump went down on his own. Then those guys dogpile, put as much bone, flesh, and body armor in between them and the president. They do not get up until the shooter is down. You kind of heard them say that because there was microphones recording the whole thing. So once shooter was down, and they made sure the rest of them, we can't assume what's going on in their ears. They got plenty of comms. But they had to ensure that it was safe before they pulled their bodies off the president, then lifted the president, and then moved the president. I would say the movement looked a little hokey, unfortunately.
It was a little clunky.
Yeah,
a little clunky.
And keep in mind, it's hard for us, like armchair quarterback, and like that's a lot of stress and that's a lot of shit going on. And, and I'm sure, like I said, all the comms coming into their ears is going to make them move, stop, move, wait. We need to make sure this one, we can't assume what's going on in their earpieces, but I have to assume that was part of making them look clunky. And then getting to the vehicle, getting him inside and getting out of there. I think we saw some of the female piece that was very damning, right? That one lady pulling her gun, then was like trying to find her holster, couldn't find her holster. So she just
fumbling
went back
around.
to, let me just sweep everybody. And, like guns pointed everywhere. It looked
flag everybody. You mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Once again, I hate to armchair quarterback the damn thing, because we don't know what's going on in their earpieces that made things go the way they did, but it certainly didn't look good. From the assessment to the execution of the layers of protection, to the actual movement of Trump, just looked a little hokey. I think, it's unfortunate.
Yeah. And I think, you've said armchair quarterback a couple of times here. I think the difference is that you are more credible to speak on these issues than I am. For example, what do I know? I'm not in security. I've never had to worry about any of these things. I can look back and say, hey, look, this wasn't right. And I can come up with all these conspiracy theories. The difference between you and I is you actually have experience, real world experience, where you've done things like this. And so, yeah, you can armchair quarterback, but also there's some weight to it, which causes us to look at things differently. It is pretty wild. And I want to get into the female piece of it, because there's a huge conversation regarding not just with this particular incident, but generally this DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion piece. And when you look at the images of a woman who's literally 2/3 the size of President Trump, it's even that alone, or the woman who's fumbling around with her firearm trying to figure out what to do, or there's another image of a woman, back behind Trump, kind of looks crouched over. I mean, we're taking a snapshot in time. It doesn't illustrate the entire picture,
right?
But it's pretty damning, and it's a real indictment on DEI, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. Like I've always said, you need pipe hitters that can flip the switch to violence in a heartbeat, and they do it from a thinking shooter's point of view, meaning they're pulling guns and they're doing what they need to do, but they're also smart enough and experienced enough not to do something stupid in those moments, right? And, pipe hitters tend to be males, not females, and that's what you need around your president. It's important to note, too, the Secret Service is not an offensive unit. It's 100% defense, right? I mean, everything they do is defensive. And that's just how it is in the PSD world, right? You wait for something to happen and then you respond as quickly and as methodically as possible based on your protocols. And so at the end of the day, they are always at the disadvantage, and it's on them plus technology. And then they have this whole department called glass and steel, right? Their glass and steel folks are the ones for putting up, bulletproof glass on a podium, for example. Steel would be the vehicles, and then they've got a lot of other tools in their arsenal that they can bring to bear. But the candidates don't typically get that. That's usually reserved for the president. So I think there's a lot of, I think they're going to end up, with this investigation, and when you go through and assess everything, there's probably going to be some changes. And the big piece for me was, where were the drones that day? The Secret Service drones, the law enforcement drones, the hired security force drone. Where is the drones? Like, they're not, you and I can buy a drone and check out the area and ensure that there's nothing going on that's, suspicious, or some guy's creeping up to a building and then climbing up the side of it and then crawling across the top of it. All of that, a drone would have detected in a heartbeat. But going back to the female leadership and, increasing Secret Service female employment by 30% so that we've seen it, I think that's, I just feel like you need pipe hitters around the leader of the free world.
I agree. I think too many people tend to believe, and this is a direct result of the feminist movement, that just because a woman can't necessarily do the same job a man can do, that she's inferior. And I don't believe that. As far as human worth goes, women bring so much to the table, so much to the equation. We need women in society and culture, but we don't need them in these roles. That's the reality of it. And I would even suggest, and maybe you disagree with me, we don't need them in combat roles. Supportive roles? Sure. Absolutely. I think there's incredible women who are incredibly nurturing, incredibly talented, incredibly intelligent. Do I need them breaking down doors in some foreign conflict? Of course not.
Yeah.
I think only a degenerate, weak, pacified society would even argue that case.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I think women have a place in everything in our lives, obviously. And it's nothing against women. It's bringing the best possible performing, highest quality person for the job, right? And if your job is to drag a 200-pound plus man to safety, it probably is going to take another man of that size and strength to do it, So the standards of what the best is, what is the best for the president, and then hire based on that. Not hire because we need to fit a certain percentage of different people and demographics into an agency. It's, hey, it's the president of the United States. Now, what does it take to protect him the best we can, right? And there's variables. Then you make sure all of those variables are matched by the people and the technology you put around him. And I think if you worked it backwards, one, that's not discrimination, right? That's just facts that you're adhering to and requirements that you're adhering to. And the odds are it's going to be a bunch of linebackers that can carry a 200-pound man to the safety of a vehicle or whatever the incident is. You know, it's not rocket science. And it used to be the standard. It used to be okay. But as we've seen the last couple of years, it's become strange that different minorities of our population have the biggest bullhorn, and the majority have to sit here and go, "Oh, I guess we gotta go with this. We just have to roll with this." Like, what happened to majority rules? It just doesn't exist, which is the foundation of democracy. So if the majority doesn't rule, then where's the democracy at?
Yeah, I mean, the only issue I take with what you said is I think it is discrimination, you know, and I don't actually think discrimination is a bad thing. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with discriminating, excuse me. You know, when I have a job that needs to be completed, I'm going to exercise some level of discrimination to find the best person possible. Now, I'm not going to discriminate on immutable characteristics like skin color, hair color, sexual orientation, female, male. I'm going to discriminate based on, to your point, what is required of the job. People have a negative connotation of discrimination, and also the word judgment, which is another one, especially in Christian circles. We shouldn't judge. Maybe, but are you telling me you don't get to exercise any discernment because God told you shouldn't judge other people? No, I'm going to treat people differently, and I'm going to hire and bring people into my circle based on what I think they're able to accomplish.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I feel like, you know, yeah, we've taken words and we've polarized them to the point where you feel like you can't even use them. And then you got to get creative on how do I get what I want without looking like what they think I'm going to look like. And I mean, that's a whole lot of waste, right? Like a waste of time, energy, stress. Like, man, why can't we just go back to the 80s when I was a kid and said retard? I wasn't making fun of like anybody with mental disorders. I just like the word, hey, that's retarded. No different than saying, hey, that's goofy or weird. You know, it's amazing that over time we've just become so sensitive when we really don't need to be. It just creates more drama and stress for everyone.
I mean, you use the word retard. When I was a kid, me and my buddies, we always called each other faggots. Like, it was what it was. Like, you're a fag. Like, it was just a word, but everybody's so hypersensitive over all of this stuff, to your point. And it just makes life just kind of miserable when everybody's latched onto these things. It's like, just get over it. Like, get tough and get over it.
Yeah, for sure. It's, I get like, a part of it is, me working in a corporate arena, right? And corporations, the HR departments basically rule the organization, rightfully so, because they want people all to be treated the same, treated equally, make sure it's a good work environment, everybody's happy. So I kind of get like the HR side of it, having been involved in it so many different times. But when you really start just nuking things that aren't necessary, that's when it becomes a little more ridiculous.
Yeah, and to your point, every organization, every company, I believe, has the right to say, hey, we're not going to use that language. Whether you agree with it or not is irrelevant. A company can decide, hey, we're not going to speak that way. We're not going to use that language. And if you do, you're out. I can respect that. That's fine. If I'm not interested in those rules, then I don't have to do business with that company. So it's pretty simple to me. Anyways, I want to go back to something about the shooting and then get into a little bit more meat of what I wanted to address with you today. Is I was really surprised. You talked about this shooter getting within, I think, maybe the New York Times or one of these big legacy media organizations had suggested that the rooftop from which the shooter shot was about 130 yards. So basically a chip shot to the president. And I'm really interested how this individual was able to climb up on a rooftop. People saw him well before he took any shots. I saw one report and even an image, and I don't know if this is accurate. I try to take everything with a grain of salt, that there was a ladder that this individual had brought and set up against the building to climb up onto the rooftop. This is unacceptable. And I can't help but believe that not only is it unacceptable, was this allowable?
Yeah, it does seem strange considering there were the BBC interview with the witnesses that were standing in that area, and they clearly said there's someone climbing on the building with a rifle over there, and supposedly told law enforcement. And law enforcement, I think at first didn't do anything. They either didn't believe it or didn't see it for themselves. And then I think I saw another report where an officer that actually did see him and engage him, at least verbally, the shooter then turned his gun towards that officer, and the officer then crouched down and took cover. And then shortly after that, then started taking shots on Trump. So you and I, this obviously we're talking about this very fresh, right? It just happened. So as we both know, the facts will continue to either be confirmed or change, which usually is the case, once investigations occur and everything. So, but for right now, yeah, it looks like complete lapse in security. They did not follow any protocols that I've ever seen or leveraged, in the big world of perimeter security, where you have the 4 or 5 Ds, right? It's, you want to deny, you want to delay, you want to detour. Ultimately, you want to set everything up so that you can then detain, right? And then the last one is, defend or quote unquote death if they're coming through your perimeter in a certain fashion. But I mean, even the most basic of following the principles of the 4 or 5 big Ds doesn't seem like anybody took any of that into account as it related to this. Yeah, I think a lot of information may still come out that we're not privy to yet because we're talking about it so early.
Yeah. I mean, look, breakdowns happen, and I'm not going to jump on the conspiracy theory bandwagon just yet. There might come a point where I do, but the quote I've heard and that I try to live by is never attribute to malice what could be attributed to stupidity or ignorance. And my biggest concern is that we have, let's just hypothetically say there was no malice other than the shooter's intentions. There's no conspiracy behind it, that we just won't do anything about it. The head of Secret Service, I don't know her name right offhand. She's not going to step down. There's going to be no accountability for this woman. There's going to be no accountability for any of how this is all handled. That's what's frustrating to me. You see these congressional hearings, for example, and all these politicians grandstand and they get their TikTok reels and all this bullshit. And at the end of the day, like, nothing changes. And that's the most frustrating thing for me. And I think the majority of American citizens.
Yeah, I think you're right. All the way until we hit November 2nd, and then January, I think there'll be some accountability then. It's, I don't think, Trump's not the kind of guy that's just going to let this thing go. So once he's in there, I think there'll be a full sweep of you're fired across the board. And then some rapid improvements, changes, adjustments. No doubt about it.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit here. I still want to maintain and stay on this vein of what happened in Pennsylvania, but I'm actually really interested from your perspective, from the bystanders' perspective. You've got hundreds, if not thousands of people in the audience. You've got at least one person killed, I think 1 or 2 people injured as a result of this outside of the former president. What is your take on the reaction of the participants? Did you see things that you thought, okay, that person handled it well, that's what I would have done? Or did you see some general behavior you thought that was handled poorly, I wish more civilians knew this? I'd love your take on that.
Yeah, as my full-time job is providing all the crisis management, which is really on the preparedness prevention side, right? Good policy, good workforce education, and good tools that support it so that, if you find yourself in a crisis, you're only in it for the shortest period of time possible. And then you can get to post-crisis as quickly as you can, right? And with that mantra, open air venues like that, massive people, let's face it, these things are scheduled. People know they're going to show up. It's not like an organization where, hey, before you show up, we're going to provide this training on what to do if shots are fired. But mass shootings aren't anything new. And people should know at this point, the run, hide, fight mantra. And run obviously is your first option if it's available, because increasing distance obviously increases survivability. Hide, meaning take cover or get concealment, is the next best thing if you can't run. For example, the people sitting behind the president, they're in stadium style seating. They're kind of, it's almost like being in an elevator, for example, right? A contained environment, because you can't easily just get off of the bleachers, right? Because you're surrounded by a bunch of other people. And so the other people become these natural barricades that prevent movement. So at that point, you should be getting down, taking cover. I found it interesting that most people behind the president kept their phones up, started filming.
Yes.
Some people leaned right and leaned left, but very few people disappeared into the bleachers, or you could drop down into the seats, if you will, and they continued to just kind of sit there and look around. Now, I think people down in front of the president, it was hard to tell. I think some people did physically get up and run, right? And others kind of sat, but long answer, I'll shorten it up here a little bit, is just understand that very simple mantra of run, hide, fight. And it's in no particular order. It's based on the environment and the situation you're in. If taking cover makes sense, then do it. If running makes sense, then do it. And if you feel like you need to fight, then yeah, by all means, fight. So if I personally would have seen somebody crawling up the side of a building, and then, getting onto the roof, I think I would have definitely gone over there and yanked that kid right off the wall or joined him on the roof. I mean, that's just me personally. Like, I would have personally gone, hey, I'm going to go fuck this kid up before he does something stupid.
Yeah, I think you're a different breed, and with all due respect to other people and, of course, you as well, you're a different breed. And you also have a lot of training. Right. So the normal average American doesn't have the level of training that you do, that you're going to be running toward. And it also comes with your personality. I mean, you wouldn't have been a Navy SEAL if you didn't have some of that inherent just fighter mentality. And I think there are people who do. They're just, my youngest son is one of those. I don't know if he's going to become a Navy SEAL or anything like that, but I know that kid wants to fight. Yeah. Like, he always wants to fight.
Yeah.
It's just in his personality.
Well,
so I guess it's hard. Go ahead.
Yeah. On that note, I'm not saying everybody should be able to do that. I think you have to go, okay, what am I capable of? Right. And do your capabilities match your courage? Right. Because if you don't have the courage that matches, if both of those things aren't equal, then you'll find yourself in a world of hesitation and get yourself killed or get other people killed. Right. So capability and courage got to be combined. And if you're one of those men, then you should be doing that. That's the takeaway.
I also wonder, though, if there's some cultural conditioning, let's say, and there were men, you can see in the videos, who identified that this was somebody who should not have been there, somebody who had a firearm and were clearly threatened by what was going on. But then you have, what's the guy's name? Daniel Penny. Daniel Penny, if you remember, is the guy who subdued the individual on, I think it was either the train or the subway, and he ended up killing him. He choked him out. He ended up killing him, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. And, he's being tried for murder, if not manslaughter. It might be manslaughter, but he's being tried right now. He was indicted. So it's like, what's a guy to do? He has to balance, like, do I do what I believe is right? And from a principled perspective, it's easy to say yes. But then there's some very real world consequences for doing what you're suggesting.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's unfortunate. We are I always tell people the end of the wars, both Iraq and Afghanistan, for us, were basically governed by attorneys, which is insane. And then coupled with attorneys was investigations, right? Everything you did, it was all good, but, we just need to investigate it anyway. It's just, and so I feel like, obviously we have put ourselves in a situation where doing the right thing or doing something good once again creates hesitation because, well, what's the consequence? And is my action worth the consequence that may be delivered to me, which is kind of unfortunate, right? Because if we've got a bunch of people that want to do the right thing, but they go, wait a minute, I might go to jail. Never mind, I'm not going to do the right thing now. Well, that's a horrible place for society to be.
I mean, this guy, again, based on the circumstances I know, Daniel Penny, that guy should be given a key to the city. I mean, he should be heralded as a hero, not as a criminal.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the problem that we as society have is we place these people into these categories that they don't belong. We should be celebrating him because he was a man who was acting courageously and not only on the behalf of his own self, but other people who were in the subway at the same time. And it's a hard pill to swallow when you have a guy who knows what he should be doing, but he's also got a family and he's also got responsibilities and he's got people to take care of, and you hear this, I'll just mind your own business. And I hate to admit it, I kind of get the argument. I kind of get the point.
Yeah, no, I do too. And then having to rely on the judicial system to, claim whether you're guilty or innocent. And, and even if you come out innocent, you've bankrupted yourself to the point where, what do you do next? And your name is tainted and everything else that comes with it. So the initial consequence, most of the time, is not even close to the biggest issue. It's all the other consequences that come later to just trying to do the right thing. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I don't think anybody would have expected this. I heard it's shocking, but not surprising. I think that's a pretty good assessment of what happened over the weekend. But what are some other scenarios that are more predictable? Because look, as men, we have a finite amount of time and resources and energy and attention. So what are some other real world scenarios that are more likely to occur that we as men can prepare for and maybe even leverage? If you're preparing for one thing, it's actually going to cover a broad swath of things that might happen, for example.
Through my books, it's all been the same rhetoric from me. Preparing for crisis in general starts with human performance. So as a man, you've got to get in the gym, right? You've got to be capable of rescuing yourself, rescuing your family, or even, strangers. But you can't do that if you're not getting in shape, right? You got to have the strength and you've got to have the endurance. Both of those things coupled together, allows you to perform when stress is high and you have zero time. And so what leads to that is tactical decision making, right? Tactical decision making is just that. It's making decisions when you have an abundant amount of stress and zero time. And the way that you become really good at it is the old adage of what ifing every environment you go into, right? So if I'm going into a coffee shop or my local gym or wherever, you got to sit there and just take a couple of seconds. It's not a big deal, to go, all right, where are my exits? Because the exits dictate my route. What are the obstacles? And of those obstacles, which ones stop bullets? And then where are my improvised weapons? Because I don't have anything with me right now. And the more you play through these scenarios, you're basically answering the questions, right? And those answers are actions. And that way, if something does catch you off guard, because we always have to respect the element of surprise, you've already answered the decisions hundreds of times before you face that threat. So now you've put time on your side because all you got to do is act out the very thing that you have decided hundreds of times before, right? And you always, right? Time equals opportunity. Opportunity equals survivability. And so the goal is always make time an ally versus an adversary. So human performance, tactical decision making are, I think, two huge skills, if you will, that every man should be practicing so that they're better prepared for what could potentially come around the corner.
Yeah, I tend to look at this in the realm of sports. You know, if you're going to go compete against another football team, you're going to study film, you're going to visualize, you're going to try to get an idea of what the opponent's going to do so that when you get on the field, you're not making decisions for the first time. You might be experiencing it for the first time, but you're not making decisions for the first time. And so when that tackle pulls and goes to the left, you can be pretty confident that that's a play to the left side, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of guys, how many people are just buried in their phone, right? They're at at dinner with their wife or their kids, or they're hanging out with their buddies and they're buried in their phone. Or I went to dinner the other night with my girlfriend and there was probably 15 guys at the table next to us and they're completely just shit-faced beyond, recognition. And they're just loud, obnoxious and swearing and everything else. And it's like, man, those guys are useless. And if something were to go down, those guys are completely useless. And not only that, they're probably a liability more than anything else.
Yeah, you're right. Awareness is key. And so if you turn tactical decision-making into your own game, what ifing your environments that you're walking into, you're automatically forced to put your phone away, right? So tell yourself, I'm going to start what ifing everything so that I'm not distracted. And that applies to driving down the road, going through intersections, stop signs, right? We all know that you can have your seatbelt on, a full tank of gas, and still get T-boned by some idiot that is on their phone. So element of surprise, once again, is always there. But if you have your head out of your ass and you actually pay attention, you'll see the person running the red light if you just look left or right as you leave the line when the light turns green, right? So yeah, you point out something great. Is just simple awareness goes a long ways, but we've all lost it because of everything going on around us.
You talk about in the book the Civil War, right? Surviving Civil War.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious. I mean, obviously, the thing I like about your book is the pictures. It's so much better for a guy like me. I'm like, oh, pictures, I can deal with this book. But I am curious as your take on potential civil war. Like, is this something that we as Americans know that happens in other countries? That doesn't happen here. But if you spend any time thinking about it or looking at how it's happened in other countries, it's not far-fetched to believe that could actually happen here, or at least some level of civil unrest between political parties, especially now considering the temperature that politics is at. What is your take on potential civil war, what that might look like, and what we need to do to be prepared for something like that?
Yeah, so it's not fear-mongering for me. With these books I do, it's all about providing skills in the most digestible format. And as you mentioned, they're all illustrated. And, what better way to learn something than through pictures, especially like the ones that I do are very much like step 1, 2, 3. Okay, got it. You know how to do that now. And as it relates to invasion, civil war, that potential of World War III that we always talk about, it started for me just a couple of years ago when I started the book. I was like, well, tensions in the climate and everything feels just different. And I don't know that you feel it, but I just felt like the gap between the right and the left is so big that it opens us up to chaos in the center, right? And what does chaos look like? Chaos looks like what happened to Trump, right? When you have an American citizen trying to take the life of another American citizen running for president, that in itself literally could be the trigger for a civil war, especially when the left and the right are so vastly different. And that big, massive gap in the center basically leaves us open to just anything could happen, right? So do I want something like that to happen? No, we none of us want that. But can you prevent it through conversation? Hell yeah. Because once you actually start talking about the potential of civil war or World War III, and people actually feel the gravity of something like that, then it might cause some change. It might cause some people to wake up. It might cause people to go, you know what? Just talking about it, thinking about it really is nerve-wracking, and I never want to experience it. So maybe I should be a little more flexible in thought, in belief, whatever it is, so that I can get a little more to the center and we can close this massive gap where chaos exists, right? And that's the goal. I'm not trying to instill a civil war. It's more like, hey, no, I'd rather make everybody think about it, talk about it, and hopefully decide 100% against it through skills that could get you, that could save your life if interrupted, if we had an invasion, if there was World War III.
Yeah, I mean, I just pulled up the book because if I remember correctly, it's in legal stuff and disclaimers. Number one is no incitement or endorsement. So you're not trying to incite any of these things. No. You're just trying to make sure that men are prepared.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's entertainment. At the end of the day, it's entertainment, informational skills that no one should be, practicing unless, things go really bad here in our country.
Yeah, and I also think there's skills that are transferable. If you're, for example, practicing marksmanship, well, that's going to apply not necessarily if you're in a civil war, but if you're trying to go shoot a deer this fall for your family, mm-hmm. right? So there's skills that you can develop and learn that are not only going to apply to some catastrophic situation like you may be addressing in the book, but they're going to apply to real world scenarios. A great example of that is food storage. You hear a lot about food storage from preppers and making sure you have enough to survive in case there's the zombie apocalypse. What a lot of people don't consider is you may be out of work for 30 days or 60 days, mm-hmm. and you got to live on food storage for a few days because you don't have $200 to go buy groceries this month.
Yeah.
So, this $200 wouldn't go a month, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Maybe 30 years ago it would have, not anymore.
Yeah, no doubt. No, yeah, that's a valid point, right? All the skills also are from a predator-prey point of view, right? If I know what the predator is capable of and I know all their tricks, and the predator could be another, a foreign nation's military, it could be a criminal, right? There's all kinds of different predators out there. But if I know how they operate, then I'm going to be able to detect them. I'm far more aware. So a lot of my books really are just about giving you the education so that it increases your awareness, so that if you notice oh, wait, it's happening to me right now, right? Whatever that skill is. There's a lot of skills in there that people consider taboo, but when you flip it around, the predator-prey aspect, knowing that skill isn't for you to go do. It's so that you can recognize it when it's coming your way.
Good point. What do you think the likelihood of, because since we're talking about invasions, civil wars, World War III, what do you think the actual likelihood of a foreign invasion on American soil is? Is that likely? Is that a possibility? What's your take on that?
No, I don't think it's likely as an initial conventional, no conventional force is coming here, right? You got 330 million Americans, you got 430 million guns and trillions of bullets, right? So nobody wants to come here because they're not going to win at the end of the day. They're going to get massacred, and they know that. So invasion takes on a different definition these days, right? Cyber is, you could very easily invade the United States just through cyber attacks alone. We've been talking a lot about EMP, right? One of the things that's interesting is we pride ourselves being protected with two oceans on either side of our country, and that has been awesome all the way up until the Chinese have stolen our EMP technology. They could deploy them onto balloons, but where they have confirmed, where we've confirmed where they've deployed them is on submarines, right? And so if you were to take one of these EMP loaded submarines, put one on the West Coast, put one on the East Coast, and then they fire it off, that's all you really need, right? If I take out the West Coast and the East Coast with EMP, that's enough to basically bring us to a full stop here in the United States, right? And then let us fight for ourselves, which then turns into a civil war, right? So there's a lot of ways that they could cause us to just fight ourselves if they wanted to. And I think that's the more important, scarier side of the reality of somebody like China, who has stolen all of our technology and deployed it onto the very things that take advantage of what we're proud of, and that is two oceans on either side.
Right. That's actually a really scary proposition. Like, I never had considered that before. Just create enough civil unrest through, think about how upset you get when Instagram is down for an hour. You know, create enough civil unrest where we don't have electricity and we don't have power, we don't have internet, we don't have cell phone service, that we just begin to eat ourselves.
For sure. If you took just the major cities on our coastlines down, then it would create a civil war. And that's why this book, I think, is so important for people to understand that you've got to have skills to defend yourself. And odds of us, getting so bad to where we are at each other's throats, I think is slim to none. I think we can be grown up enough to go, all right, let's not do this. But could one of our foreign adversaries put us in a position where we now have to fend for ourselves? Most certainly. That's how they would do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. What's your take on illegal immigration? And the fact that I even have to ask what your take, everybody in America should be revolt against it, of course.
Yes.
It's ridiculous that we don't. But when I say what's your take, what I'm asking more specifically is, what is the threat there that we should be aware of?
You guys know I've a history of covert operations, and so I've seen how creative we are, right? And there is no doubt in my mind that China specifically has put hundreds of people in this country that could be called to duty one day through clandestine communication and to follow through with whatever their mission is. Their mission could be national infrastructure, right? Dams, power grid, whatever it is, where you need boots on the ground to 100% affect us. Do I think it's possible for the Chinese to have done that through illegal border crossings into the United States? 100%. Do I think highly funded terrorist organizations that we've stopped looking at because we get distracted? The intelligence communities always get distracted. Whether it's Ukraine or whatever else is going on in the world, okay, let's focus all on that. Okay, now that leaves that big gap, right? So that terrorism can grow again. Do I think they're smart enough to put their guys, stir them down in South America, make them do the long walk, blend in with the rest, and infill into our country? Sure. I think it's all possible, and I think there's probably aspects of that's already happened, and we're kind of too late. I think Trump had the right idea with a wall. We all support it here in Texas. There's not one Texan that's going to tell you that, I don't want a wall. Yeah, we want a wall. It's insane not to. It's our border. And I think people have forgotten what the definition of a country's border is. And they like to blur it and find all these reasons, these humanitarian reasons to let it happen, which I get, they're looking for asylum because, they're being raped and tortured in their countries. Great. Stand in line and do it the right way, which will be at the gates on our wall, right? But,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
I think a majority of this stuff is a little too late. And that's, once again, the book, Surviving Invasion, Civil War, and World War III. The invasion has already begun. A clandestine invasion is very real.
Well, I'm glad you're talking about it in this way because there's not a lot that you and I, as an American citizen, can do about closing down the border, for example. But there is a lot that we can do to address it. I spent some time on a hunt with my girlfriend earlier this year in Del Rio, just outside of Del Rio, Texas, and it is a very real thing. In fact, her and I had an encounter with police officers and what I assume are illegal immigrants. I talked with another guy that says if you ever see anybody in Del Rio with I think it's a yellow folder, if I remember correctly, it means they just got their paperwork. They were just released in the United States and they've got a prepaid Visa card with $1,400 on it, courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer.
Yeah.
It's unreal. It's insane. It's infuriating.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I am a supporter of number one, bulldozing the IRS. We all have these moments. If I was president for the day, I would take the IRS. I would say, hey, IRS, your new job now is to audit the United States government, right? I want you to audit all the senators, the congressmen. I want you to audit every single government contract in Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Kellogg Brown Root. I think we would save billions if we just had them auditing the United States government for the next 10 years and leave the U.S. citizen alone. Leave us alone. I want to keep the money I've made, and I sure as hell don't want to share it with illegal aliens. And with that, I like to know where my money goes. I mean, I'm surprised at this point when it's time to pay your taxes, I don't get a little Scantron and a number 2 pencil that breaks out all of the different silos of where I want my money to go. I would feel a lot better if I could bubble in defense. I'm going to bubble in border. I'm going to bubble in, anything that I want my money to go towards. I should have that choice. I would love it if there was a president that did that, said, you know what? We're still going to collect taxes, but at least you get to choose where your money goes. And even if they didn't follow it, man, it would kind of feel good when I write that check every year that, okay, here's my check and here's my Scantron. I've bubbled everything I want my money to go towards, right? We should have a choice, but we don't. And that's irritating. And once again, it goes back, where's the democracy in that? We are the majority, but yet I don't get a choice in whether or not an illegal alien gets $1,400. It's insane.
Right. Well, and I mean, to your point about the president, I would love a president who did that. It's not really up to him. I think a lot of people just assume he has so much control. I mean, we're talking about our elected officials. Some of them are your brothers in arms. One that comes to mind in Texas is Dan Crenshaw.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, I know.
We need to bring people in to represent us. This is not a conversation about whether anybody agrees with Dan Crenshaw or not on his policies. This is an issue of understanding those are the levels at which these decisions are being made.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we need to vote not only for our presidency, but our state representatives so that they can actually represent us in a correct and powerful way.
Yeah, no, totally agree. It all starts kind of at the bottom and works its way up. But at the end of the day, leadership, I wish, would just take more of our thoughts and desires into consideration as it relates to the money that we give to them. It's not a lot to ask. It really isn't. I don't think there's one person in this country that supports their money being given to non-U.S. citizens. I don't even understand why you would want that. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I think some people do, but that's a level of ignorance because they just believe it's not their money or something. You have a lot of these bleeding hearts who believe oh, we don't want these people to suffer. And I don't want people to suffer either, but I'm not willing to trade that at our own expense as citizens of this country. But a lot of people don't even know, oh, that's actually your money. All the money, when you get paid $1,000 and you see on your paycheck that you only get 800 of it, 150 of that is going to something you probably don't agree with.
Without a doubt. Yeah. And it's unfortunate. That's when I wish I'd had a little Scantron in my number 2 pencil.
No doubt.
It would make me it'd make me feel really good about it.
Whether it happened or not, to your point earlier.
Yeah. It's
Well,
all
Clint, man, I love having these
psychological, man.
conversations with you.
It's all in our head.
It is. It kind of reminds me of the bread and circuses, right? Just entertain them, make them think that we have their best interest at heart when the reality is they do not. But I think the point of this conversation and the point of the book also is that although there's not a whole lot you can do on a macro U.S. economic or policy or even foreign policy front, there is a lot that you can do personally to take care of yourself and take care of the people that you have a responsibility for, your wife, your kids, your neighbors, colleagues, coworkers, etc.
That's right.
Clint, tell the guys where to connect with you and learn more about what you're up to and obviously pick up a copy of the book.
Yeah. First, thanks. It's good catching up with you, buddy. It's always a good conversation.
Always.
And yeah,
Always.
you can see everything I got going on at clintemerson.com. Super easy.
Sweet. We will sync it. That's the quickest, like, I was expecting you to say more, but hey, it's all there. So just go there.
Yeah, that's easy, man. I could sit here and list out stuff, but just go to clintemerson.com.
Right on. We'll sync it all up. We'll let the guys know where to go. I appreciate your commentary on what happened over the weekend, and of course, all of your information and books. I actually go through this stuff with my kids. My kids and I have a good time going through this stuff, whether it's shooting or camping and setting up shelters or food storage or evacuation plans in our house. We always go through these things and love looking at it, love seeing what we can implement. We have a good time with it. So, brother, I appreciate you.
Well, good to hear. And yeah, thank you. And you guys, have a great week.